Blog Talk Radio.
BangTheBook.com.
Welcome everybody to the Week 10 edition of the College Football Podcast presented by BangTheBook.com here on the Blog Talk Radio Network. I'm your host, Adam Burke. Joining me, as always, BangTheBook.com college football and college basketball expert handicapper, although he does do all the sports, Mr. Kyle Hunter. Kyle, how's it going today?
I'm doing great, man. I had my best weekend of the year so far last weekend in college football, so that was really nice. Gave me a good boost, and ready for another big week, and we got a pretty good slate of games again.
Yeah, we do. I noticed you're selling hockey picks as well, so you're really broadening your horizons there.
Yeah, absolutely, and everything's been going well. The hockey picks have been going well. NBA starts up for me tonight. I didn't play any games last night, but all the sports have been going well the last couple of weeks. 16-5 run, last 21 picks. So I don't tout myself on here too often, but I have done well lately, and looking forward to talking about some more college football. And it's not far around the corner that we're going to be talking about college basketball either.
That's a tremendous segue. Very nice. Way to go. I'm glad you set me up for that. As Kyle just mentioned, we talked earlier in the week, decided that we're going to do our first edition of Handicapping the Hardwood. That's our college basketball podcast on November 10th. The season begins November 14th. So we'll go over some preseason things, maybe look at some conference futures, national championship futures, things of that sort. Looks like we're probably going to be doing the show on Mondays each week, so we can talk about what's usually a very good Tuesday and then a Thursday slate of games. So definitely check that out here. And just part of our audio content at BangTheBook.com. A lot of great things going on, and I'm sure we'll have some college basketball articles getting fired up soon. We got NBA, and obviously we'll continue with college football and the NFL. But I guess the big story right now in the college football world, the college football playoff first rankings came out yesterday. I'm going to go off on a tangent here in a second, but is there anything that surprised you from the rankings?
I'm not too terribly surprised about the rankings. Some people pretty upset about the SEC and where they're ranked. Not really surprised about that too much. The SEC's perception is so much higher than everybody else that I expected them to be up there where they are. I'm a little bit surprised that Alabama's sixth. It seems like I thought perception of them would be a little higher to boost them up, but they did have a loss at Ole Miss where they didn't play very well. I think Alabama's a pretty good team that could easily rise in those rankings. Not a lot of surprises for me from that, and I don't know that they mean too much at this point. So I'm not going to get too upset about the early rankings.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go. I don't think they mean anything at this point in time. You've got, 4 weeks left of the regular season. A lot of things are going to change. A lot of things are going to happen. And, perception plays a role in these rankings. I mean, they're supposed to be taking, statistics and injuries and strength of schedule and wins and losses into consideration. But perception is also going to play a role. And this is a group of people that can very easily be influenced. I just don't see any value in coming out with these numbers now when they're going to change so much. I mean, it's kind of interesting, too, that I was listening to MLB Network Radio today on Sirius XM, and they were talking about how, oftentimes in the World Series now, you don't get the two best teams playing for the championship because the playoffs are just a separate tournament. And I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen here with the college football playoffs is that we're not going to have the four best teams playing for a national championship because, the SEC beats up on each other and the different criteria that they're using. It concerns me and disappoints me because this already looks like a very flawed system, even though it was supposed to be an upgrade from the BCS.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes over the next few weeks because, like you said, I expect a lot of movement. And I do agree with you. I don't really know if there's a huge benefit in doing this at this point. One other thing I would say is that I'm a little surprised Notre Dame's only number 10 because nobody really has a better loss than Notre Dame at this point. So I think Notre Dame at number 10 is pretty low. I'm not a big Notre Dame fan, but I think that Notre Dame fans could have a little bit of a beef with the ranking. I do think that this ranking system in general, like you said, can be affected a lot by perception, and that does worry me. It's possible that there's going to be some ways that we're going to want the computers back from the BCS. I like the 4-team playoff. I think that having 4 teams instead of just 2 is an upgrade. We'll probably end up having more than 4 someday. But it remains to be seen how these rankings are going to work out. And I think it's certainly possible that we won't have the 4 best teams. Although I would say that in a lot of other sports, that's what happens too. Like you said, Major League Baseball, definitely in college basketball. I mean, March Madness, you end with a couple teams playing for the championship that definitely aren't the best 2 teams throughout the year, almost every single year. I mean, UConn won it last year, and I don't think anybody could argue that UConn was the best team over the course of the year. So, I mean, I guess it does happen with a lot of other sports. Hoping that it doesn't happen in college football, because I'd love to see the best 4 teams, because that'd be the best for viewers. It remains to be seen what will happen. I guess we'll just have to monitor it moving forward.
And Notre Dame is probably your most interesting test case of the playoff rankings because, as you said, nobody you could probably say that Alabama has a better loss to Ole Miss, than the loss to Florida State, which Notre Dame almost won anyway. But that was Notre Dame's first true road game. They don't have a win over a ranked team, at least a currently ranked team, because Stanford fell out of the rankings. So there's a lot of different layers to breaking down a lot of these teams, and obviously it's something we could spend an entire show on. But let's get into the quick hitters for this week. This is our little segment where we talk about some news and notes, things that you may or may not be aware of that will change, both your evaluations and perceptions of teams. So what's the first point you've got for this week?
Well, I know we're going to talk about them more in a few minutes, but I think the team that needs to be mentioned first here is Ole Miss, just because of the types of injuries they've got. Go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but Denzel Ekamdiche and Robert Ekamdiche. Robert Ekamdiche is questionable, kind of an undisclosed injury there, but Denzel Ekamdiche is out for the season. He's a really good linebacker for them, so they're going to miss him a lot. One thing that I've noticed, though, is that a lot of people aren't mentioning as much about Laramie Tunsil on the offensive line. He's a really good offensive lineman. They're going to miss him in a big way. And this is an Ole Miss offense that has not exactly been too good even with him. So I worry the most about his injury.
I'm going to go ahead and say that you got those names right because I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce them either, unfortunately. But, that Tunsil injury, definitely an interesting thing because we haven't really seen a major update, although I guess it came out earlier today. Hugh Freeze says that Tunsil and Robert, whatever his name, the defensive lineman, they're both going to try to play against Auburn, which is surprising to me. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about those injuries in a few minutes. But yeah, I mean, this is the time of year where you can really get a crippling injury. And, again, to harken back to the college football playoff rankings, how would they, you really have to wonder how they're going to factor in injuries like that. It's not like a quarterback or something, where it's clearly evident what a team is missing and it's also reflected in the line. But, some of these injuries in the trenches are definitely things you got to pay attention to.
Yeah, definitely. I'm surprised that Tunsil is going to try to play based on what I was reading yesterday because of the fact that it sounded like a pretty severe injury. So we'll see how he plays this week, or if he does end up playing. Next on the list is Central Michigan. Thomas Rawls, Michigan transfer, which, by the way, I'm pretty sure Michigan would want him at this point. But he's a really good running back for Central Michigan. He's been their bruiser. He carried it 40 times, 2 games in a row a few games ago, and was really just totally controlling the game for Central Michigan. He's questionable this week. They play Eastern Michigan, so they probably can win without him, but keep an eye on that one if you're interested in betting on Central Michigan on the spread because Rawls means a lot to that team.
And Rawls, a player that we thought was going to be suspended for some legal trouble that he had gotten in earlier in the season. And when they decided that they were going to go with him, as well as when they got Titus Davis back, that was a much different Central Michigan team. I know they're a team that you've played on several times this season, and they've been pretty good to you.
Yeah, Central Michigan's a pretty good team. They're a little bit under the radar there in the MAC. I think they have about as high of an upside as anybody in the MAC at this point. So keep an eye on Central Michigan, but they definitely need Thomas Rawls in the lineup. Oklahoma has a couple injury notes. Keith Ford's probably going to be back this weekend. He's missed the last 4 games. He's a pretty good running back. Oklahoma plays Iowa State this weekend. They probably would be okay even without him, but it's an interesting note nonetheless. And Sterling Shepard is questionable. He's a really key wide receiver for them, so keep an eye on the status of Sterling Shepard moving forward.
Yeah, I think that I think the Shepard injury would affect the total more than anything in this game because I think Oklahoma has no real trouble with Iowa State. But, yeah, definitely going forward, those are 2 injuries to keep a close eye on.
And interesting note from Michigan about seeking medical red shirts for Jabril Peppers and Desmond Morgan. Peppers was a really highly touted recruit. It's going to be interesting to watch to see moving forward if he does get the medical red shirt and how he'll play in the future. I expect him to be a real ball hawk and a tremendous safety moving forward. So Brady Hoke's probably not going to be around to see him play next season, but whoever's the coach there is going to end up having a really good safety.
Yeah, that was exactly what I said. I do a weekly college football news and notes thing, generally with injury updates that have come out of the weekend. And that was exactly what I said about that team up north is when Brady Hoke's gone, whoever's next in line can enjoy 4 more years of Jabril Peppers. And I believe he was the number 1 overall recruit in the country last year. So definitely a big player there. And, it's not the reason why that team up north has had such a tough season, but it hasn't really helped either.
No, a lot of things have gone wrong for them so far this year, but that's just been one of them in the long list. Texas Tech, Davis Webb questionable. Keep a very close eye on that one. Davis Webb means a lot to this Texas Tech team. If you've watched Texas Tech much at all, you know that they have no depth behind him now. Last year they had 3 good quarterbacks. Now they have 1. So if Davis Webb can't play, they're in a lot of trouble. Texas Tech obviously had some major issues last week, giving up 82 points to TCU. So, they don't have any defense. If they're going to win, they're going to have to outscore people, and they can't do it without Davis Webb.
Yeah, you got to wonder how Baker Mayfield's feeling right now. Davis Webb really hasn't been healthy all season long. Didn't he had a slight separation or something like that of his non-throwing shoulder, maybe like week 2 or week 3. So this is a kid that hasn't been healthy all year, and you got to figure Mayfield, if he hadn't tried to transfer out of the program, he'd be getting some significant playing time there. So definitely something to watch for, especially because Texas Tech really doesn't have anything going for them outside of their passing game.
Yeah, I believe he did injure himself in the Oklahoma State game, tried to come back a little bit, was struggling, and basically they kind of forced him back into action because they didn't have anybody else. So it's an interesting switch from Texas Tech having so much depth last year to nothing this year, essentially. The last point I wanted to make here is about North Carolina. North Carolina is playing a little bit better right now. They had some really high expectations coming into the season and really laid some eggs early in the year, came back and played well against Notre Dame, beat Georgia Tech, and then beat Virginia last week in a surprise. Larry Fedora kicked onside with 4 minutes left in that game, ahead by 1 point. So I was reading about that, and it struck me as one of those things where it ended up working because they got the onside kick and they won. I don't know what that message is. I mean, I guess it's to me it means that he doesn't trust his defense to stop anybody. But you could also use it as a positive message to say, hey, we're going to trust our offense to finish this game out like they did, and it's going to give people a morale boost. But that's something to keep an eye on. Just Fedora is trying a little bit of everything right now, and a coach kicking onside up a point with 4 minutes left is not something you see every week.
No, definitely not. And you really have to wonder about the signals that does send to his team. And as you said, that's a team that really started off struggling quite a bit. A couple other injury notes to mention for this week. Obviously, J.T. Barrett is a big one for Ohio State. Sprained MCL, expected to play. I don't know why they can beat Illinois without him, but it looks like they're going to send him out even though they play Michigan State next weekend. Washington quarterback Siler Miles, you talked about this one last week in the Quick Hitters. He missed the Arizona State game with a concussion. Questionable right now for this week's game against Colorado. And given how ugly the Huskies offense looked last week, they clearly need Siler Miles in the lineup. And then also Alabama lost offensive lineman Cam Robinson to a leg injury. There's a chance he returns in a couple of weeks. They take on LSU next week. I believe they take on Mississippi State the week after that. So there's a chance that he comes back for that game. But I read a very good breakdown. I'm not sure if it was at Alabama's SB Nation blog or somewhere else, talking about Alabama's offense without Robinson, with what they did against Tennessee, and they really struggled. So definitely injuries to pay attention to, and I think it's very telling how a lot of times in this segment we talk about injuries on the offensive and defensive lines because they really don't get the publicity, I guess I'll say, that they deserve.
Yeah, they deserve a lot more publicity than they get, and they mean more to the game than most people give it credit for. And good point about J.T. Barrett. I agree with you. I don't see why he would play in this game. I'd also be really careful betting on Ohio State. 28.5-point favorites in that game. I think there's definitely a chance that Barrett, if he does play, won't play very long, or he might not even play in the end. And laying 28.5 points, you would want Barrett to be playing, so be careful with that game.
Well, let's get to the Inside the Line segment for this week. A handful of very interesting moves, a couple of them in the ACC. We don't spend too much time talking about the ACC because it's really Florida State and nobody else. But Duke, they're now a 3.5-point underdog. It was as high as 4 in a game that opened Pitt -1.5 or pick at the Chris books. So a lot of steam on Pitt this week, and that's a little bit surprising given how poorly they played last week.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those situations where people are thinking that Pitt's turnover issues last week was what caused a little bit of a misleading final. Now, Pitt's not a very good team. I'm not convinced Duke's very good either. And essentially, the ACC in general is just no good. Like you said, that's really why we don't talk about them. You've got Florida State and then a bunch of teams that are not very good. But it surprises me that line's moved that much. I'm surprised that Pittsburgh was more than a 3-point favorite. And based on their inconsistency this year, I think that'd be a tough one to lay the points with.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, Pitt fumbled on, 5 consecutive possessions or something like that in the first quarter. It was just a disastrous game for them. But, I look at this line, and I look at what both teams have done up until this point, and I really don't think that the opening line was an overreaction to anything. I think the opening line was about where it should have been. So it makes me even more surprised to see Pitt up to a 3.5-point favorite. But Duke, a team that kind of a porous run defense. They struggle on the defensive side of the ball overall. Offense is down a notch or two this year. So, maybe it's just a case where I haven't paid as close of attention, to Duke this year as I should have.
One more note about that game. I was looking at the box score here right now as we're talking. Pitt actually fumbled 7 times in that game, lost 6 of them. But Georgia Tech also rolled up 612 yards total offense. So those of you who are thinking that that's a misleading final score of 56-28, maybe it's a little bit misleading, but Georgia Tech ran 465 yards in that game. So even when Georgia Tech had to go the whole length of the field, they had no trouble doing so.
Well, we just talked about North Carolina as a team that's kind of on the upswing. I was talking with you when totals numbers were released yesterday, and I mentioned something about playing the North Carolina over. And before I got a chance to, the number really got away from me. But Miami opened an 11-point favorite at bookmaker for this game. It's up to 14.5 or 15 across the market. So not a whole lot of people believing in North Carolina right now and the turnaround that they've had over the last couple of games.
I think this line was 17 yesterday, so there's been a little bit of buyback here with the line getting a little bit out of control. I like North Carolina at that line. I think that, North Carolina is a team that can score points. Miami doesn't have that good of a defense. I think perception might be a little bit too high on Miami based on a good showing at Virginia Tech, but Virginia Tech's a really banged-up team that's just really having some serious problems right now. And more than 2 touchdowns, I think, seems like quite a bit on North Carolina.
Yeah, good point about that number going up to 17. And you mentioned Virginia Tech, and they're a team that's had some steam coming in against them, down from a 5-point favorite to a 3-point favorite. Doesn't look like this one's going to make it to 2.5, at least not immediately. I imagine there's a chance that it could. But Boston College, certainly a team that's better than people expected them to be.
Yeah, I think Boston College is a pretty nice surprise this year, and you got to give credit to Steve Adazio there. Boston College plays really hard for him. I don't think they have that much talent, but he's getting a lot out of them. And the running game's been pretty good with Murphy running at quarterback. Virginia Tech is playing so bad right now, there's no way that I could back them at any number. It's surprising to me because I thought a little bit more of Frank Beamer, and I definitely had Virginia Tech ranked too highly at the beginning of the season. Virginia Tech's had a bunch of injuries, but I don't think there's really any excuse for how terribly their offense has been playing. Michael Brewer looks really bad, and Virginia Tech's just really, really in a lot of trouble right now. So I agree with this line move. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I do as well. And, yeah, Virginia Tech, a team that you and I were both a little bit too high on. In fact, I thought that they would have a shot coming out of the ACC Coastal to beat Florida State. But, that clearly not something that's going to happen. And, it's unfortunate. It's just a terrible conference overall. But one other line move to talk about for this week, this one, somewhat of a stunner. BYU down from a 7-point favorite to 3.5 or 4 against Middle Tennessee State. This game is on the road for the Cougars, but I'm kind of surprised to see this move as well. I realize they didn't play very good against Boise State, but Christian Stewart had looked good in the 2 games before that. So this appears to be a very sharp line move on the Blue Raiders, and therefore it's something you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, this is definitely a very sharp line move. The public's betting on BYU right now, and the line's still moved down a lot. So that tells you a lot about this game. It's a tough scheduling spot for BYU. They played at Boise State last week, now come east to play Middle Tennessee. This is a pretty big game for a team like Middle Tennessee because they play in such a bad conference. They don't really get many chances against a pretty big-name team. BYU beat them 37-10 last year and covered the spread, which last year was 23.5. So that also really is another way to look at this game, that BYU was favored by 23.5 last year. Now we're seeing 3.5 or 4 for BYU at Middle Tennessee State. So there's a lot of things going on in this game, but I'd be really careful backing BYU in this one with the public betting BYU pretty heavily and the line moving down.
Well, I guess we didn't talk about it because it's kind of hard to talk about Thursday night games since a lot of our listeners listen sporadically throughout the rest of the week. But Florida State down from 7 to 4. Carlos Williams going to play, which, again, I could completely go off on a tangent about that. But, not a whole lot of love for Florida State this week, even though the public is still backing them almost a 60% clip. I certainly agree with the line move here. However, you look at this Louisville team, and this is a major step up in class for them. So I'm a bit wary of taking either one of these teams, especially at the current number of 4.
Yeah, I think you and I could have a pretty long show about Florida State and their issues and Carlos Williams, Jameis Winston, and them continuing to play. But that's probably better for the listeners if we don't do something like that. So we'll just talk about line moves instead. But Florida State, even 3.5 showing up at the LVH right now, which really does surprise me a lot. I think the line move from 7 down to 5, maybe even 4 makes sense. But you're seeing 3.5 some places now. That's a really small number for a Florida State team that's definitely very good. They seem to be pretty healthy, and everybody's going to be playing. Louisville doesn't have very much offense, so I worry a lot about that. But I will say Louisville's defense is very good. Wouldn't surprise me if that's a low-scoring game. So it makes sense that the line moved down some, but it might be a bit of an overreaction at this point.
Well, we'll talk about what appears to be the best game of the week this week. Once again, coming out of the SEC West, Auburn at Ole Miss. Ole Miss, we already talked about some of their injury concerns. A couple of the biggest ones in the trenches, which obviously that's going to be a problem for any team. But a very different sort of test for Ole Miss in this game. A lot has been made of how good their secondary has been. They've really gone after the ball. They're hard hitting. generate a lot of turnovers. But this game's going to be all about stopping the run for Ole Miss. I think it's a different kind of test that they really haven't seen yet. I think that's reflected in the line where Auburn is a 2.5-point road underdog here at Ole Miss.
Yeah, this is a really good game. I think there's a lot of moving parts in this game, and I like games like that because you have so many different things to handicap, so many different things to watch as a viewer. Auburn didn't play well against Mississippi State a couple weeks ago. Really didn't play very well last week either in their 7-point win over South Carolina. So Auburn's a team that I'm still high on, but they definitely need to pick it up a little bit here. Mississippi, they really missed an opportunity last week. I mean, if you only give up 10 points, you need to win the game. I know LSU's defense is pretty decent, but Mississippi needed to win that game, and they could have easily still been undefeated right now. The end of that Mississippi game was very discouraging for Rebels fans too. I watched the end of that game, and there was a lot of indecision from Hugh Freeze, and it led to a really an ugly finish for the Rebels in a game that they could have tied with a field goal there, and they ended up running a play, and Bo Wallace throws an interception, which that's another thing we should probably talk about this game is that Bo Wallace doesn't particularly care for the play calling from Mississippi. I was reading a couple articles about that yesterday. There's a lot going on in this game, and Auburn's a good team that I feel like has been here more often. That's why I lean toward Auburn. Auburn's been in these big games a lot. I know Ole Miss beat Alabama at home earlier this year, but to me, Ole Miss is getting a little bit dinged up, and it's a really bad time to be dinged up when you're playing an Auburn team that is really strong in the trenches.
Yeah, I think the injuries are the biggest concern for me, and then the second biggest is Hugh Freeze. As you said last week, kind of in a spot that he wasn't really used to. I mean, they haven't played a whole lot of close games this year at Ole Miss. He gets into a close game against Les Miles, who people are kind of indecisive on his coaching chops, but Freeze winds up making the bigger mistake. And yeah, the Bo Wallace thing, that's certainly a problem. I mean, that guy, he's the leader of your offense, and for him to come out criticize the play calling, I believe his exact words were that it's too conservative. Now, I read that one of two ways. I read that as Mississippi's going to open up the playbook this week because they saw all the success that South Carolina had chucking the ball around the yard against Auburn. The other way I read it is that this has been more of a problem than we've found out about. And winning cures everything, which we all know. All those of us that follow sports, we know that winning cures everything. But this may have been a problem between Bo Wallace and the offensive coordinator and the coaching staff for longer than just this week. But he was able to let it out because they only scored 7 points. So, I kind of look at it as it's really a negative from both sides because I think if Ole Miss tries to do something that they're not accustomed to on offense, just to please Bo Wallace, I don't think that's the right way to go about it. You were 7-0 before last week's game. You need to get back to doing what has gotten you to this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at this, and I have some pretty strong feelings on this one. First of all, Hugh Freeze really messed up at the end of that game, and the coaching staff deserved a lot of blame for that. But I think Bo Wallace is very wrong to say that after a game like that. Like you said, he probably must have been feeling that way for a while and then decided to let it out after the LSU loss. They only scored 7 points. But where I'm going to go with this one is Mississippi offense has really not played that well all season long. Even in the Alabama game, which was kind of considered their coming out party, and Bo Wallace played great. He played really well in the fourth quarter, but before that they couldn't move the ball at all. And if you look at the last 2 weeks, Bo Wallace has completed less than half of his passes against Tennessee, where the defense just dominated in that win. And then last week completed 42% of his passes against LSU. So, in my opinion, Bo Wallace just needs to play better. I'm not sure Bo Wallace is a good enough quarterback, and we did talk about that last week. I liked Mississippi a little bit last week, but I did say the reason I wouldn't bet on them is because of Bo Wallace. And Bo Wallace is a quarterback that's thrown a bunch of interceptions in his career, 17 a couple years ago, 10 last year, 7 already this year. If you look at guys who are really good quarterbacks in college football, they don't throw that many interceptions. That's just far too many mistakes. And I don't really blame Mississippi's coaching staff for being a little bit buttoned up on offense. And I think the reason that they're a little bit buttoned up on offense is because they're worried that Bo Wallace might turn it over.
Yeah, I think Auburn wins this game outright. I took the 2.5 already. I wish I would have gotten the 3. I think Auburn wins this game. I think last week was a little bit of a look ahead against South Carolina. I mean, the SEC East is so far behind the SEC West. And really, South Carolina gave themselves a good chance to win that game. Steve Spurrier going with an onside kick, and then Dylan Thompson threw an interception in the end zone that would have put South Carolina ahead 42-35. Instead, they lose by that score. So I think Auburn was looking ahead a little bit to this game. I really like the Tigers in this spot. I think it sets up well for them. And you've got a lot of adversity now on that Ole Miss sideline. And, yeah, they beat Alabama, and it's arguably one of the top wins in the country. But when you talk about injuries and you talk about infighting on a team, those are two really big problems, especially when you're taking on a team that's as good or better than Alabama.
I agree with you. I like Auburn here. I think they win straight up. I think that Mississippi's a team to watch moving forward, too. They obviously have a tough schedule going down the stretch, and it wouldn't surprise me if Mississippi maybe not completely falls apart, but struggles a little bit the rest of the year because they do have so many issues in the trenches. And then, like you said, it's never good when your starting quarterback's calling out the play calling like that. It can't lead to good things at all. If Mississippi loses this game to Auburn, like I think they probably will, then I think it could spiral out of control a little bit here for Mississippi.
Well, an interesting game in the 7:30 time slot, Stanford and Oregon, and this one's particularly interesting to me, and I purposely skipped over this one in the Inside the Line segment because I knew we were going to talk about it. But this number opened 11.5 at Bookmaker, and it's down to 7.5 pretty much across the market, although an 8 has popped back up at Pinnacle, one of the sharper offshores. But I really do not get this line move at all whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't understand it either. I think that everybody is thinking that the past couple years Stanford has played them so well. Stanford was an 18.5-point favorite a couple years ago when they won outright. 10-point underdog. 18.5-point underdog 2 years ago. 10-point underdog last year. Won outright both times. So I think it's a recent history type of line move. The problem with that move, though, is Stanford's not the same team this year. Stanford's basically played keep away the last couple of years from Oregon, and they've been able to because they have such a dominant offensive line and a really good running game. But when you don't have Tyler Gaffney or Stephen Taylor, it looks a lot different for Stanford. They really can't run the ball consistently. And I think we've talked about on the show before, and I've made it pretty clear that I think that Kevin Hogan's a game manager, not a game changer at quarterback. And other than last week's game against Oregon State, and Oregon State's really have a lot of issues on defense right now, this Stanford offense does not look good at all. They really struggled against Washington. They struggled a lot against Notre Dame, and only 10 points against an Arizona State defense that's not very good. So Stanford, I don't think, is really equipped to play this same type of game they played in the past couple of years against Oregon.
No, I don't think so either. And look, I'm not real high on Mark Helfrich at Oregon. I think he's really getting by because he still has the Chip Kelly the Chip Kelly holdovers, on the team. But you look at the job that David Shaw has done recently. He almost single-handedly lost that USC game for Stanford in week 2. Severely outcoached last year in the Rose Bowl by Mark D'Antonio and Pat Narduzzi. So I don't really think Stanford has the coaching advantage that people seem to be perceiving them to have in this game. You already talked about how they don't really have that workhorse bell cow running back this season. Kevin Hogan leads the team in rushing touchdowns with 4. So you could take that for what it's worth. But Oregon's really playing well lately. They've gotten a couple of nice road wins in tough environments. Stanford coming off of – Stanford's been terrible on the road this year. 20-13 win at Washington. We found out Washington's not very good this season. 17-14 loss at Notre Dame. You give them some credit for that. But only 10 points at Arizona State a couple of weeks ago. Arizona State not exactly among the nation's elite defensively. So Stanford just hasn't done anything to impress me. And I think that's why this line move scares me, is because I don't understand where it's coming from. And anytime there's that sort of uncertainty – it's very difficult to say, I don't get it. I'm taking Oregon. You got to be careful with things like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's very tempting to take Oregon. They're on my leans list, and I might end up playing them as the premium play. So I'm going to take a closer look at this game. But like you, I'm not terribly high on Mark Helfrich, but I am really high on Marcus Mariota. I think that people might take him for granted a little bit more than they should. I talked about Bo Wallace and how he makes too many mistakes, turns it over too much. One of the reasons I like Marcus Mariota so much is he just does not throw interceptions. He finally threw one last week. That was his first one of the season. 24 touchdowns and 1 interception. Last year, 31 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. This is a guy that makes really good decisions with the football. Stanford's defense is good, and I don't think Oregon's going to put up a really big number here or anything. But I'm afraid that Stanford's offense isn't good enough to score very many points, even against an Oregon defense that isn't that good. I think Oregon at this point has to be really, really pumped for a game like this. You lose 2 times in a row to Stanford. They got to be ready for this game. So I think you're going to get the Ducks' best effort for sure. And because of that, I think that this is one of those potential spots where it wouldn't surprise me if Oregon wins going away. Take out a little bit of their frustrations on Stanford.
I think so as well. I think that may be the way that I go with that game. A game that I have a very strong opinion on, Fox Sports 1, 11 o'clock Eastern kickoff between Utah and Arizona State. And we talked about Utah and USC last week. And one of the things that I mentioned we were talking about that game is that I saw fade spots coming up the following week for both Utah and USC. USC is at Washington State, and we've seen the line move against them. And then Utah here at Arizona State. We've seen some Arizona State money come in to push this number to 6 today. So I've got a very strong opinion on this game.
You know, I think you have to say that both of these coaches are doing a really good job with their programs. I like Kyle Whittingham a lot. He's a really good coach for Utah. They play really, really tough, scrappy football. This is a team that probably outperforms their talent level every single year. I'm not necessarily a big fan of Todd Graham, but he's definitely a good coach. He gets a lot out of his team. And it surprises me how much better the Arizona State defense has been playing lately. I think that's something to watch in this game because they've only given up 10 points in the last 2 games against Stanford and Washington, although it'd be pretty easy to point out that Stanford's offense is really playing poorly and Washington was without Siler Miles. So we'll see how Arizona State's defense fares going forward. I don't have a strong feel on the side for this one, so I'm gonna let you be the one that puts out the side that you like a lot in this one. I think this is a pretty good number. I would have liked Arizona State if it was a smaller number, but at this point, I think that the value's gone for me. The way I'm going to go with this one is I like the under. Utah's a team that plays really slow. They run the football a lot. Wilson's kind of a game manager as well, and Devontae Booker is their bell cow. So Utah's going to run the football a lot. Arizona State's offense is pretty good, but Taylor Kelly's still working into it. So I think 58 points is a little bit too high, so I like the under in this game.
I absolutely love the Sun Devils in this game. It's a spot I had circled. I liked them from the beginning. To me, I'm not even all that concerned about the number for this game. That's how confident I am in Arizona State. I think this is an awful spot for Utah. They're coming off of a pretty emotional double overtime win on a Thursday night a couple weeks ago. Then the win over USC last week. They're doing it with running the football, and they're doing an excellent job. But very, very tough spot for them. The altitude is such a great home field advantage for them. They've rattled off 3 straight wins, so perception of them is changing a little bit. And it's supposed to be 90 degrees in Tempe during the day on Saturday. I realize it's an 8 o'clock kick, but it's still going to be very balmy for the guys from Utah. So I think fatigue could be a little bit of a factor in this game. Also, Taylor Kelly's second game reassimilating himself back into the offense. At Washington's a tough place to play. Washington's offense has been awful. Their defense has some playmakers. I think Shaq Thompson's one of the best players in the country. But Kelly's back at home now. He'll have a full week of practice to iron out the problems that he's had with his skill position players. I just think this Utah team is going to run out of gas in the second half of this game. So I think Arizona State really pulls away late. Also, the Dries Anderson injury for Utah, their top wide receiver, that's a big concern because they don't have much of a passing game to begin with, but an injury like that's going to make them even more one-dimensional. So Arizona State can really load up the box and tell Travis Wilson, you know what, if you can beat us, you go right on ahead, because I don't think they're worried about him.
Yeah, you're right. That's a really big injury, and Utah's pretty one-dimensional to start with, and that makes them even more so. I think from a PR standpoint, this is a pretty good line, but I do agree with you that the situational spot is a really good one for Arizona State, and Arizona State has a really good party atmosphere late at night. Even though it might be a little bit cooler, there are some pretty big benefits to this game being late at night for Arizona State. It's a tough spot for Utah, no doubt. Utah has played really well on the road so far, so I guess if I was going to make a devil's advocate point, that would be it. And they won at UCLA, they won at Michigan, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but they also won at Oregon State. Certainly the win at UCLA was an impressive one. So Utah's proven they can play on the road, but this is the toughest spot they played in, and I'm not going to play the side. I can see why you like Arizona State a lot in this one. Like I said, I like the under here.
Well, we'll head to Morgantown, where Lee Corso and Kirk Herbstreit are going to be dodging burning couches all weekend. But College game day in Morgantown for this battle between TCU and West Virginia. TCU hung 82 points last week on Texas Tech, and odds are it probably could have been more if they wanted to. But we've talked about Trevon Boykin on this show several times already. Arguably the most improved player in the country. He's doing phenomenal things with this TCU offense. And, I mean, let's face it, this is a team that could very easily be 7-0 had they not blown that lead against Baylor. But West Virginia, if Boykin's one of the most improved players in the country, West Virginia's got to be up there in the most improved teams in the country. Clint Trickett looks great at quarterback. They've rattled off 4 straight wins, including an impressive win over Baylor, and it was really a letdown spot last week for them against Oklahoma State, sandwiched in between these 2 top 10 games, and they passed that test with flying colors. So a very big game in Morgantown this week. West Virginia, 5.5-point home dog.
Yeah, I like this game. This should be a really good game to watch. It's an interesting game, another game with a lot of moving parts here that I really like these type of games. I think TCU is a team that is the odds makers are really trying to catch up with them. TCU's 6-1, and like you said, they probably should be 7-0 if they didn't have such a bad fourth quarter. But they are 7-0 against the spread. I was wrong about several teams in the preseason, but TCU is one of the teams that I was right about. TCU is a team that I was really high on. Played the season win total over. That's definitely going to cash in because they just need one more win. But Trevon Boykin is really playing extremely well. The hire of Doug Meacham was just magnificent for TCU. You look at them consistently, they've scored at least 30 points in every game, and 30 points was against Minnesota when they won 30-7, and they basically didn't need to score anymore because Minnesota can't do anything on offense. So, 58, 42, and 82 points the last few weeks. West Virginia has probably one of the other most improved players in the country in Clint Trickett. So you got some really, really improved teams and some really, really improved players in this game. Really interesting game. I like the over a little bit, but 73 points is a lot. As far as the side here, I'm going to go with TCU, though. I don't really like going against West Virginia at home because it's a really good environment, unless you are Lee Corso and Kirk Herbstreit, like you said, because they'll probably be dodging those burning couches. But TCU is a team that has played well on the road so far this year. They really should have beaten Baylor. And TCU is a team that I think has a little bit better defense, a little bit more balanced and well-rounded than West Virginia is. So I like TCU in this game, but from a betting standpoint, I don't like it near as much as I do from a fan just viewing standpoint.
Well, you got about 30 seconds left streaming live, so for our listeners that are tuning in live, please download the podcast. We'll have our final thoughts on this game, as well as 7 free picks, combined anyway, between our Pick Six segment and also Kyle's exclusive podcast free pick. So definitely make sure that you tune in for that. I think one of the interesting things about this game is if you've been watching the market each week, and obviously that's something that we do, there's been West Virginia steam early in the week almost every single week so far this season. That hasn't happened this week. So that's a very telling thing to me, where either this is a good number or, those groups that have been on West Virginia are looking to take TCU. Like you, I think this is a much better game to watch than wager on, because I think you could see the glass slipper fall off of West Virginia in this game. But at the same time, this is a West Virginia team that lost by 10 in a neutral site game to Alabama, and a lot of people kind of, sort of blamed Alabama for that and said they didn't play all that well. But West Virginia is obviously a much better team than we thought. So I don't know. I agree with you. I think the lean to the over is probably a good play. West Virginia's got two of the most dynamic receivers in the country, and they're a matchup nightmare for everybody. But, man, who would have thought that out of the Big 12, here in Week 10, we'd be talking about TCU and West Virginia?
Yeah, that's the best place to go with this. Is at who would have thought that TCU and West Virginia is the biggest matchup in the Big 12? It's supposed to be Baylor and Oklahoma, and even Kansas State's actually leading the Big 12. So you've got Kansas State, TCU, and West Virginia as major players in the Big 12. The Big 12 is a pretty nice conference so far this year. I've been impressed with the Big 12. There's a lot of solid teams there. There's obviously a couple really weak teams at the bottom, but Big 12 is not one of those conferences like the ACC or anything where you've got a bunch of mediocre or poor teams in the middle. They have a lot of solid teams. This should be a really good game. I think looking at West Virginia, what worries me a little bit about them is it took a late comeback to beat Texas Tech. They were almost beaten that game. And then last week against Oklahoma State, I think what we're finding is Oklahoma State's just not very good. They only outgained Oklahoma State by 12 yards in that game, so a little bit misleading that they won 34-10. Oklahoma State with Dax Garman, not terribly good on offense like they have been in the past. TCU is a way, way better offense than what West Virginia's been playing against. So I like TCU a little bit, but I love this game from a fan standpoint.
Well, we'll get into our Pick 6 segment here. We picked 6 games off the card, sort of rapid-fire fashion, give a little bit of analysis on each side, and you can choose to do what you want with the information that we give you. I'm going to start with an 11:30 a.m. kickoff. This one, a battle of branches of the military. Air Force coming east to take on Army. Air Force opened a 3.5-point favorite. It's down to 2.5 or 3. I guess I'll say Air Force -3 for this game.
I'll take Air Force. Army's really been disappointing so far this year. The Army team was supposed to be quite a bit better than they are. Their defense can't stop anybody. This is an interesting game. I really like these games between two teams that run the triple option. They see that every week in practice. I like playing the under in games like this, but this number's a little too low for me to play it because Army hasn't proven they can stop anybody. I'll take Air Force. They're more consistent. I think they have a better coach, too.
Yeah, Jeff Monken in his first year, and we didn't talk about Georgia Southern, but that's where Monken left, and Georgia Southern's been one of the best under-the-radar teams in the country. I'm going to take Air Force just because this line intrigues me. You got Air Force coming east. They obviously have a good home field advantage in Colorado Springs with the altitude, but this line says something to me. And as you said, Army with losses to Yale, 22-point loss at Kent State a couple weeks ago. Kent State, one of the worst teams in FBS, or at least in the MAC. So I'm going to take Air Force in this one, but not entirely confident in it. Noon kickoff from the American Athletic Conference. East Carolina, only a 7-point favorite at Temple. This line should raise some eyebrows.
Yeah, it might surprise you a little bit. I'm going to take Temple in this one. I think Temple has a good shot to cover this number. It wouldn't totally shock me if they went outright either. East Carolina played so well in the non-conference slate, and they haven't really been playing well lately. They've been sliding by here in the AAC in a conference that's not very good. They were pretty fortunate to win against USF. They didn't cover, and they didn't even come close to covering last week against UConn. Temple's a team that's not been playing very well, but they've proven in the past that they can play well against good teams. They should have beaten UCF last year. And Temple's a team that I think has a little more talent than most people realize. And East Carolina's a little bit overvalued. I'm taking Temple. I think it's a really good spot for the Owls.
I think this line is very scary. I wanted to like East Carolina, but the line is kind of begging for Pirates money. I think if I had a gun to my head, I'd still take East Carolina because they're clearly the more talented team, especially with the way Temple's played over the last couple of weeks. Also, East Carolina with a little bit of extra time to prep for this game since they played on Thursday night last week. So I guess I'll go with the Pirates, although I'd say that's a pretty reluctant pick. Washington at Colorado. I already talked about the status of Siler Miles. Definitely something that you want to keep an eye on. This number from Washington -6 down to Washington -4. A lot of people saying this is Colorado's last shot to win a Pac-12 game this year. Are they able to at least cover the 4?
Yeah, I like Colorado in this game. Colorado has a good coach in McIntyre. They're definitely going the right direction. They really played well and showed a lot of heart late in that game against UCLA. UCLA has been disappointing this year, but UCLA has a lot more talent than Colorado, and for them to come back in fourth overtime like that, it showed me a lot. Washington has a lot of question marks on offense. Their defense is pretty good, but in a game that should be close, I'll definitely take the points. I like Colorado.
I already took Colorado at 4.5. I wish I would have gotten a 6. I was kind of asleep at the wheel there. But, yeah, I think this is a great spot. Colorado can feel that Pac-12 win that's been eluding them. And I think they're in a great spot to get it this week. You bring Washington, down from that heavy marine air to the high altitude in Colorado. So it's a pretty good home field advantage for the Buffaloes there. I like them quite a bit in that game. Let's talk about Arkansas, +10.5, I guess I'll say, although 10 and 10.5 are still out there in the market right now. But Arkansas +10.5 at number 1 Mississippi State.
I don't like this game at all, so I'm struggling to even think of which way I'm going to go with this. But I'm going to go ahead and take Mississippi State because I don't think Arkansas can stop them. This is not a game that I like at all. Mississippi State, their offense has proven that they can do it every single week, and Mississippi State's also stopped the run pretty well. So that's all Arkansas can do on offense. So just a slight lean to Mississippi State for me.
I think I'm going to take Arkansas in this game. I think you look at Mississippi State, and their advantage over everybody has been their physicality on the offensive line. They have the biggest offensive line, I believe, in all of football. So they've been able to push teams around, and everybody's favorite fat coach, Brett Bielema, he's kind of putting together a Big Ten sort of team in the trenches where they're very big on offense, big on defense, more of a power running kind of style. I don't know if it'll work in the SEC over time, but I think it works in this game. I think that they're able to really hang in there, and we'll see if Mississippi State is possibly exploited a little bit before their matchup at Alabama in 2 weeks. Another interesting game, another interesting late kickoff, Arizona at UCLA. We've seen UCLA money in this game, up from 4.5 to 6.5, with the Bruins probably a touchdown favorite by sometime tomorrow.
This is a tough one for me because I've been so high on UCLA, but this is a team that I was wrong on. I'm going to take the points in Arizona. Rich Rod's really doing a good job at Arizona. UCLA has more talent than they're showing. I've been disappointed with their effort so far this year. I still think they should be better than they are. They got some issues on the offensive line and stopping anybody on defense, and Arizona can certainly score points, and they're going to score a lot of points in this one. This is a game that I think should be pretty close, so I'm going to grab the points in the underdog.
Yeah, I'm going to take the points as well. Rich Rod's done a phenomenal job at Arizona, and I don't think that you can take that for granted in this game. I mean, Jim Mora Jr. has done a great job at UCLA too, but that's more from a recruiting standpoint. I'm not a huge fan of him as an in-game coach right now. Rich Rodriguez, I think, has the advantage there, and this Arizona team's been hanging numbers on everybody. I don't see why they wouldn't do it to UCLA. I'm going to take the points. I'm going to go against the steam. Again, I don't love it, but yeah, I agree with you. I think this is a late, last team with the ball wins kind of situation. You always want to take points in games such as that. And then finally, go with a game I'm sure that's near and dear to your heart, Old Dominion, +7.5, taking on Vanderbilt.
Oh, yeah. I mean, how can you not get excited about Old Dominion and Vanderbilt? Oh, gosh. I'm gonna take Old Dominion. I like how you saved this one for last. That was a really good one to save for last. Old Dominion in the points for me, just because Vanderbilt really shouldn't be a favorite of that much against anybody. Old Dominion can score. They should put up enough points. It wouldn't surprise me if they win the game, so I'll take Old Dominion.
How sad would it be for Old Dominion to beat an SEC team? I mean, I understand Vanderbilt's SEC in name only, but that would be a pretty bad loss for the conference. It's number down from 10, actually. So Old Dominion getting some love from the betting market. We got to figure that's a sharp move. I guess I'm going to follow the money and take Old Dominion plus the 7.5. But there still should be a talent mismatch in this game, with it being an SEC team against Conference USA. So I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens. And yes, I'm glad I saved that one for last as well. So the last item of business to take care of for this week's show is Kyle's exclusive free pick, and I'm sorry if it was on Old Dominion and Vanderbilt.
It was not on Old Dominion and Vanderbilt, don't worry. Last week's free pick was on Memphis, and they totally trucked SMU, a team that's just in a really, really sad state. So that was an easy free pick winner a couple weeks in a row. We'll try to make it 3 this week. I'm going to go with North Carolina State and Syracuse under 51. Syracuse is an offense that has a lot of problems right now. They really don't have any kind of positive things going from the quarterback. And some people kind of hoped when Hunt went down that they would play better on offense. That hasn't happened at all. North Carolina State's offense played good against Florida State, but hasn't played well against many other people since. I think this is going to be an ugly, low-scoring game. So under 51, North Carolina State and Syracuse.
I like it. I like it a lot. North Carolina State, 32 points in their last 3 games since that game where they had a great first half against Florida State, where the Seminoles really didn't appear ready to play that game. So I like it. Any final thoughts from you?
I'm looking forward to the weekend, and good luck to everybody, and I think it was another good show.
Absolutely. I think it was as well. And don't forget, as we said, beginning November 10th, the return of handicapping the hardwood, which I know everybody is eagerly waiting for, and I know Kyle's eagerly waiting for the start of college basketball season. So keep that in mind, and we'll be able to mention that again on next week's show. But that'll do it for us today. For Kyle Hunter, I'm Adam Burke. Enjoy the football action, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week.